Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to day 4 of this 5-day Introduction to Water Safety Plan Auditing. It's starting to feel like we're old friends by now. Daryl and I look forward to another session with you today. As usual, let's begin by reviewing what we've covered until now. On day 1, we covered water safety plan steps and key terms, and also introduced the what, why, who, and when of WSP auditing. On day 2, we covered what to do before an audit, including preparing the water supplier. And we also reviewed the audit toolbox and got some practice with the scoring form and the note-taking form. And yesterday, we talked about effective information gathering, and we had some practice assigning scores to audit questions and criteria. And now I'll hand over to Daryl to get us started on today's program. Over to you, Daryl.
So we're going to pick up on where we left yesterday, and we're still discussing things to do during the on-site audit. And there are 5 tasks while on-site, and we're going to continue now with note-taking and scoring. Now, experienced auditors agree that one of the more difficult questions to score is question 3.2, which says, have all significant hazards been identified at all major steps? This is really challenging because as an auditor, you don't know everything about the system. You haven't spent days looking at it, and you can't see everything when you go to the site. And perhaps the water system has some technology that the auditor is not familiar with. And knowing which hazards are more or less significant requires technical knowledge and experience. Even for experienced auditors, a list of common threats can help. I use one. I treat it as a sort of checklist. It serves as a reminder, even if it's not going to cover everything. Well, once again, the WSP Audit Toolbox comes to the rescue. Let's have a big hooray for the Audit Toolbox. This list in the Audit Toolbox is called Possible Threats to Water Safety. You can see it there, it's note number 6. And this will help auditors identify relevant hazards from the catchment to the consumer. Now, it's not completely comprehensive. In fact, we're working on an expanded list at present for another publication, but it does give some really good guidance. As an auditor, as you examine the hazardous events in the WSPs and use this form, you can check whether the WSP includes all the hazards. It's important to remember that these are threats. They're not hazardous events per se. They are not written in the X happens to Y template we like to use for hazardous events. They're simply prompts of things to consider could happen. But from an auditor's perspective, it's quite sufficient. So let's have a look at this. I'm going to open up the page, and here we are. I've got the toolbox open, and you can see that the possible threats is on pages 27 to 29. I'm just going to go there quickly, and I'll just give you a quick walk. You can see that it's broken up into different headings here. Here's one, catchment and source. So if you've got a surface water source, you can look there. If you've got a groundwater source, you can look there. If you had another source like desalination, where you'd have to do your own homework on that. Treatment plants. Treatment plants are broken up into the different elements: coagulation, flocculation, sedimentation, sand filtration, chlorination, and this is set up for traditional treatment plants. And then it's got some sections there on distribution and storage, like post-treatment, storage tanks and reservoirs. There's another section for piped network. And then there's another section there for user premises or households. So you're going to have an activity now. So your activity is for that chosen step of piped network to identify at least one issue or threat that is missing from the list. And I'll just put that up on the screen again so you can look at it. And we're going to go and look at the piped network. And that's where you're going to try and find anything you think is missing from that. I'm just going to put a poll out, which will be self-explanatory, just asking if you thought of anything else there. Can you just have a go of answering that poll, and then we'll discuss that. all you need to know is that it was neck and neck. And Angela and I are really keen to know if you did think of anything. So if you've said yes, you did find something, can you just write a chat? Just say what the additional thing was and just write it in the chat. Okay, related to chlorination, corrosion. Yep, good point. Workmanship and quality of the pipeline materials. So you're talking of like the design and construction aspects. Good point. Quality of material, yes, related to the first one. Yes, very good point. If it's poor quality material, you'll have more problems. Yes, storage tank problems, cracks in the storage tanks and reservoirs. Low quantity of water, yes, lack of quantity of water, absolutely, because that way people will be looking somewhere else for water. Okay, we'll stop there. As I said, the list is not comprehensive, but it should be a good guide. And I think you've raised some really good points. I'm going to share with you just some of the ones that, we'd thought about recently ourselves. Some of these you'd mentioned, some haven't. Change in water chemistry. So if the source water changes and you get more internal corrosion. If the pipework is exposed or has very little cover, you can be subject to breakage from traffic loads. Excessive detention times in the network. So if you've got a network that goes out a long distance and it's a dead end, you can have increased water age and therefore less chlorination residual. Also power failures at the pump stations and mechanical pump failures. So I think together we've identified the list is good, but it's not necessarily all encompassing. So thank you very much for that. Over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Daryl. So here is our familiar orientation slide reminding us where we are in this audit process. Recall that we're still at this during the audit stage, and we've conducted our inception meeting to clarify plans and expectations and hopefully to set that collaborative tone that is so important. We've collected information through interviews and records review and field visits. And we've taken good notes along the way, and we've carefully assigned scores to some or all of our audit criteria. We may or may not be done with that at this point. And now we are at the point where we will prepare a preliminary report of key activities and findings to present at our closeout meeting with the water supplier. Now, there's no one way to do this. There's no one way to do any of this, really. Rather, Daryl and I are sharing with you approaches and tools that we ourselves have used when we've conducted audits. So we suggest that it can be useful to prepare a preliminary audit report to discuss with the supplier before you conclude the audit and leave the site. We'll talk a bit later about a more robust final report that you prepare following the audit. So this preliminary report may capture general information about the audit, the dates, the objectives, the sites visited, who participated in the audits and the key activities, the main strengths that you noted, and main improvement opportunities and some priority follow-up actions. And in the audit toolbox, there is a template to help support this preliminary report preparation. What I'll do now is I'll leave this screen and open up the audit toolbox, and we can just take a quick look at what that reporting template looks like. This is the audit form that begins on page 32 of your toolbox. It's right down toward the bottom. And so the first page here has some fields for general information, like the name of the supplier and the dates, audit team member names. You can record the field sites you visited. So this is just sort of high level information, not too specific, just some general fields. And then here we have some fields to record the main strengths, just 3 to 5 of the things that you noted as an auditor that, that you'd like to commend the water supplier for. So it can be really important to balance sort of the constructive criticism that we offer with acknowledgement of the good work being done. So this is a field to record the strengths that you see. And then it's got a field to record what you see are the key improvement opportunities. Again, the 3 to 5 things that are most relevant to convey at this closeout meeting. And then for some of those improvement opportunities, if they're more urgent or important, there might be some follow-up actions that are recommended to address them. So these are some fields to note what should be done and by whom and by when it should be done. And then down here, there's some fields where you can tick some boxes for attachments. So depending on how far you've gotten with your reporting by the end of the on-site audit, you might attach some of these things. For instance, the scoring form. So if you've gotten if you've completed your scoring form, you can attach it to this preliminary report. Sometimes you won't have finished that or finalized that, and you will share that later when you share your final report. So this is just to show you that this tool is available in the audit toolbox to help guide the development of a preliminary report. This, again, here's our orientation slide reminding us that we are at during the audit stage, and the final step in the during the audit stage is to conduct it concludes just the way it began, with a meeting between the auditor and the water supplier. So we call this the exit meeting or the closing meeting. And that brings us to the first breakout room activity. So Daryl, could you advance the slide? So as usual, in a moment here, Daryl will assign you to new groups today, and you will be in those same groups all day. And each room will have a facilitator. And like yesterday, the primary goal of this first breakout session will be to briefly introduce yourselves to one another. And with the time that remains after you've introduced yourselves, please discuss this question. Welcome back, everyone. We hope you had at least a few minutes to consider and discuss what you think should be covered in an audit exit meeting. So I'll present here some examples of what your group may have come up with. You may have come up certainly with things that are not on this list. So firstly, you may have come up with thanking the supplier. So it's hard to overstate the value of being courteous and respectful to the water supplier to really help develop that nice rapport. So that's something you would do in an exit meeting. You'd use the time to discuss major findings and impressions, to share the preliminary report that we just talked about, to clear up any misunderstandings before final reporting, and to agree on follow-up actions. Those are a few things that you might have come up with. Now, remember yesterday when David Sheehan joined us, and he played the role of the regulatory auditor, and he guided us through a mock inception meeting. So David wanted very much to rejoin us today to guide us through the mock exit meeting, but unfortunately he had a scheduling conflict, so he couldn't be here. So we've had to invite a different visiting expert to lead us through that mock exit meeting. But in reality, it would be conducted by the same auditor that led that initial meeting. So we'll just have to use our imaginations a bit there. So once again, let us suppose that you all are the water supplier that is being audited, and you've just spent the last few days with the auditor, answering questions, furnishing records and evidence, leading site visits. Things are now at long last wrapping up. And you are sitting down in a meeting room to listen to the auditor present his key findings and recommendations to you. So with that, I will hand over the screen sharing to our visiting expert who will lead us through this exit meeting. Over to you.
So welcome to the audit exit meeting. So the purpose of this meeting is to discuss the overall findings and to discuss any impressions that we first of all achieved. There are three main topics we'll be discussing in this exit meeting. We'll start by recapping the audit activities. I'll then share the main headline audit findings, and we'll discuss the follow-up actions. But first, thank you for your cooperation and your effort. It's been really helped to make the audit very successful, and it's been very productive and efficient use of time. Now, I won't go into details over the audit plan, but you will recall that before the site visited, I reviewed the WSP you sent to me. We had some discussions and field visits over the previous 2 days as per our agreed audit plan. What I'd like to do first is highlight some positive things. Now, I'm now a trainer for a few seconds. Here I would summarize the positive findings because it's really important to include positive things and not just focus on the shortcomings. For example, I may say something like this. These are the real strengths of your system and your management. And I would in fact talk about each of these in a little bit more detail with the group. Now, here I am as a trainer again. Here I would summarize the key issues that need addressing. The aim here is to be constructive and not overly critical. For example, I may say something like this. And I would say, you know, these are the four sort of areas where I think the strength needed, and I would then discuss each of them in a little bit more detail and explain what the concerns were. Now, I will be preparing a full audit report and I'll be submitting that to you within a week, but here are some key follow-up actions that we already think are necessary. So here I would discuss the concrete things that should actually happen, talking about the follow-up actions and who's responsible and so on. And I would also hand over a preliminary report which has the scores. And here I would flag that the final report audit would be expected within a week, but the preliminary report they would get very quickly. And then I'm happy to answer any questions and listen to any comments that you may have, and I'm sure you'd be very interested in the scores. Thank you very much. And I know that we've spent a lot of time talking about the scores because that's what people really want to know. They really want to know the scores. No matter how hard you try to get away from that, they'll be really concerned about what score did they have. So you'll spend a lot of time in the exit meeting discussing the scores. And I hope you found the audit very useful.
Okay, thank you, visiting expert, for leading us through that mock exit meeting. And thank you, Daryl, the trainer, for making some commentary along the way. So we hope that that helped everyone get a sense of how you might run a closeout meeting as an auditor. Note that the slides that were just presented by Daryl, or the visiting expert, are included in your audit toolbox. So the very last few pages of that audit toolbox show those slides, but also note that a PowerPoint version, that is an editable version of both the inception meeting and the exit meeting slides that have been presented are available to be downloaded by you and adapted and used. So remember on day one, when Daryl opened up his search engine and he typed in the words WSP Auditing for us, and he navigated to that site where the WSP Audit Guide is, that WHO site. Well, on that list that he showed us of different downloads are these PowerPoint slides for these two meetings. So those are just there and available for your use. Here we are once again at our orientation slide. So at this point, we have concluded the on-site portion of the audit, and we're now in the after the audit phase. So what remains at this point is quite a short list. Number one is just to prepare the final audit report. And we suggest that you do this promptly, ideally within 1 or 2 weeks. And finally, to follow up on recommendations as and when needed. So the need for this will depend on the particular audit findings. So let's talk just a bit more about that final audit report. So the final audit report may be more elaborate than the preliminary report that you shared at that closeout meeting. And it may include elements that weren't yet fully complete at the conclusion of the on-site meeting. It might be that you haven't had a chance to fully finalize all of your scoring. Sometimes carrying out the audit can be really demanding, and you find yourself short of time to finish up everything by the time you leave. And or it may reflect comments and clarifications that were offered by the water supplier during your exit meeting discussions. So when you prepare this final report as an auditor, it's important to make sure that that report is constructive, it's focused on learning and improving, it should be balanced, flagging both good and not so good practices. It should be realistic, with recommendations reflecting considerations of context and resources. It should be fair. So audits, especially regulatory audits, can affect reputations and can influence investments. So they must be fair and they must be justified. Those reports should be clear with respect to the findings and any follow-up actions that are required. And lastly, the report should be audience appropriate. So they should reflect some consideration of who may eventually see the report and take care to remove any information that could be sensitive. So with that, we've now gone through all that an auditor should do before, during, and after the audit. So Daryl will now give us the 3-minute tour of all that we've done these last couple of days.
So now, as Angela has just said, we've discussed each of the audit phases: before, during, and after the audit report. And just to summarize really quickly, probably about at least a month before you actually get on site, the auditor will be in touch with the WSP team. During those 2 or 3 weeks before you get on site, you would have looked at the WSP, you would have had toing and froing to arrange all the logistics, you would have confirmed the plan, and then you would be on site. And you've just conducted your exit meeting, say, and then within 1 or 2 weeks, you would have the final report that Angela just spoke about. The other thing that we've got is this audit toolbox. And I guess over the last few days, we've really seen and we've used the toolbox. And this was one of the main goals we had in this training. So you become aware of what is in the toolbox and you've used it. And we really hope that you go and explore that further because it's a very useful toolbox. And with that, we'll have a short break.
Okay, everyone, welcome back. So let's begin the second part of today's program. Until now, we have focused on the first question on this slide, which is, what does an individual auditor need to do to prepare for, carry out, and follow up an audit, and what tools are available for his or her use? But there's another question that we know is of interest to this group as well, and that is question number 2 here. What does a government need to consider when designing a WSP audit scheme? Now, the first question is the focus of this training. This is an audit how-to course. But for the rest of today, we'll give some attention to this second question since it is a very important one. So Daryl mentioned on day 1 that this training is based on this WHO IWA publication, A Practical Guide to Auditing Water Safety Plans. So this guide covers guidance on preparing for, carrying out, and following up WSP audits, the subject of the last couple of days, but it also includes some guidance on developing a WSP audit scheme, for instance, at a national level. So for those of you involved in developing a national audit program in your countries, this will be a useful resource. So let's begin this topic with a brainstorming session in your breakout rooms. Here is your task. Imagine that WSPs are required in your country. So therefore, audits are necessary to be able to confirm regulatory compliance. So imagine that you are responsible for setting up a national water safety plan audit program. So what you should do in your groups is have a discussion and come up with a list of at least 4 key questions or considerations. And as time allows, trade thoughts on these questions for your national context. Let's look at an example. One question that you'll need to answer when establishing a regulatory audit program is how often WSP audits should be conducted. Should they be conducted every year, every 2 years, every 3 years? Will the frequency be performance-based, meaning that the better a water supplier performs in an audit, the less frequency that supplier will be audited in the future? So frequency is just one question or consideration. What are other important points that need to be considered? So this question can be found in your activity worksheet. It's activity number 15. Facilitators, I think the easiest and most efficient approach will be for you to simply share your screen, the screen with the discussion question on it so that your group can read that question. But if that doesn't work for any reason, then everybody should have the question in their activity instructions. So you'll have 10 minutes to discuss, a little bit longer than we usually have. So we hope there'll be some good discussion. Daryl will send you off now and we will see you shortly.
Well, welcome back. And it looks like you all had a good time discussing there because no one came back early, which is great. I just want to share on the screen some ideas that we had, and then we'll give you an opportunity to share some of the ideas that you came up with. So the question was related to what sort of questions or considerations would you have in setting up a regulatory audit scheme. One of the ones that you might have, for example, is how often should the WSP audits be conducted? And here are some other ones that you may have thought of. How are you going to finance the audits, and what audit criteria will you use? How will the results be followed up and checked that things are actually happening as per the audits? And what skills and experience should auditors have? And how will auditors be trained or certified? So what we'd like to do now is, if you can just write a chat of any of the ideas, anything else that you saw coming up, and just write it in the chat, and then we'll just see them as they come through. Guidelines are also important for the auditor and the auditee. Can you clarify on that? What do you mean by guidelines? Can you give some more chat comments on that? Who should be audited? Yes. Which water suppliers should be audited? Make it very clear. Okay, so the guidelines, so everyone is clear of what to expect. Yes. Thank you. How to finance it? Yes. Is it a database for keeping auditing results? Very good point there. How are you going to administer the audit? What systems are you going to have in place to manage the audit, the national audit program? How are you going to make it suit the particular water suppliers? Identify the scope and boundaries of the audit. Is it internal, external, formal, informal, etc.? There should be some road line and timeline for the national audit programs. Who's going to be the regulatory authority? Yeah, there's a lot of things to think about, aren't there? Okay, 2 points. We need to design the program plan for auditing, and we need to consider the regulatory requirements well in advance. So you've really got to plan for that in advance. Yes, it doesn't happen overnight. Okay, so what's the benefit? So you really got to convince people there's some benefit to having good auditing results. Yes, good point. You've really got to sell it. Otherwise, they'll be a little bit hesitant. So you've got to try and show them the value of it. Yes, who's going to check up and follow after the activities? Is it the auditor or someone else that's going to check that things happened? So that's 5 minutes we've had on that. You can still keep writing comments there. Before I do that, Angela, did you just want to comment on that question there? I've lost it now. About can you have international auditors, something like that. You there, Angela?
Yep, I'm here, Daryl. So let's see, it was the question from the Timor-Leste group.
Yep.
About can the national or international trainer be the auditor? There's no reason they couldn't. I guess the thing to consider that's come up with us before is it's this question of independence, right? So who is it that's conducting the training, and sort of where does that expertise lie? So in a number of cases, that expertise lies with the ministries of works. They're oftentimes leading the training for particularly the larger urban suppliers. And so when that's the case, they're perhaps not best placed to be the independent auditors. If that's a surveillance function, that's often the health sector. So it sort of just depends on who the trainers are. But I guess the key thing to consider is that independence.
Okay, a couple more that have come in while we've been speaking. Identify some hindrances and challenges that would likely be faced. There are some excellent ideas here. Do any of the facilitators have anything else they'd just like to say verbally? If so, now's your very quick chance, and keep it really short, please.
Maybe from our group, that who would be the auditor by qualification, by experience, or by certification, that's fine. But in our group, the question come out, which organization from the auditor should be, either it will be independent or not. Individual will be independent, but organization wise, how can we identify the organization that should be independent? For example, in case of Nepal, Department of Water Supply is the water safety plan implemented. Either from the Ministry of Water Supply can be auditor or not.
That it is a really important question, and the answer varies, of course, varies by country. So one of the questions to consider is who has the audit mandate. So in countries where auditing is part of surveillance, then who should carry out those audits is the surveillance organization, so often the health sector. Where audits are not a surveillance function, so it's not being carried out by the surveillance agency, well then, so we need to consider your local context and what's the most appropriate. I know that in some cases, such as New Zealand, within the Ministry of Health, there's a department that does the training and the capacity development. And then there's a different department that's tasked with auditing. So it's in the same ministry, the training, but then they feel that they get that independence because it's a different department and different individuals that are carrying out the audits. So just some things to think about, but it's a really good question, and it's the answer, of course, is country specific.
I'm going to have to call that discussion to an end now. Okay, so this question here, which I'm going to issue a poll very soon, is, did your group identify one or more questions related to auditor skills and training certification? So this question was about auditor skills and training or certification as opposed to national, sort of some other national issues. I'm going to end that poll now. And you can see that, most groups certainly did have questions about auditor skills, training or certification. It may be you never actually got onto that topic, but going by that list, it's obviously a really important issue that there's a lot of questions related to that.
Which is convenient, isn't it, Daryl? Because the remainder of our program today relates to that very question.
Absolutely. It's a nice segue. So let's start talking about the auditors themselves now, which is what we'll do for the rest of our training today. So what are the characteristics of a good ideal auditor? So I'm going to put these into two sets. There's going to be the ideal experience and qualifications and the ideal personal attributes. So if you look at the first list, first of all, you want people with experience and qualifications who are certainly very competent and thorough and comfortable and have expertise in WSPs. We want people who have training and experience in auditing itself. So just because you're good in WSPs doesn't mean you'll make a good auditor. You need to know how to do auditing like you're doing in this training program. Probably an engineering or technical background is essential because a lot of the issues to do with hazards particularly are related to understanding what the issues are. And certainly experience working within the water industry. You might be a good auditor, but know nothing about the water industry. So you need that technical understanding there. And understanding water quality standards and targets and issues to do with what your country has got as its targets, etc. And in addition to that, you've got those personal attributes, things like sort of being authoritative, but being personable and open. You've got to be analytical because you have to be quite rigorous and structured in the way you do something. And of course, you've got to be a good communicator because you want the team, the team you're visiting, the WSP team, to feel that they can ask questions and talk with you. Wow. Sounds like we're talking about a superhero, a WSP superhero. Seriously, appointing good auditors needs really careful consideration, as I'm sure some of your groups discussed. So here's one way to overcome this challenge: audit teams. And audit teams can help ensure that the audit benefits from all the desired experience and skills, because the superhero can be hard to find sometimes. And think back to the scoring exercise we did yesterday. And that's when, remember, we looked at the treatment plant that had the chlorination in the wrong location, and the backwash water and the supernatant water went to the head of the plant. And our discussion showed that the auditor really needs to understand the technical issues of water supply to appreciate the risks, implications of what may appear, if you're unaware, to be a small technical point. And this can be especially challenging for the ministries of health, which are usually the government agency responsible for water safety and water quality surveillance. So, is it reasonable to expect that these people, everybody in the Ministry of Health, will have the technical expertise to make technical judgments about, whether a WSP reflects the most relevant hazards or control measures? In many cases, no, the Ministry of Health may not have that experience. So in such cases, a team approaches can be taken, and a team approach means that there's an audit team, generally with a lead auditor, with other key competencies being covered by others. So that's one way to overcome that. Another option is to use certified auditors who meet all the certain qualifications and criteria and so on. Now, this can be easier said than done, and we'll soon hear some experiences and ways that this has been done. We're going to have two of our experts share some of their experiences of auditors and audit teams and certified auditors. So we'll hear first from Bonnie, and then when Bonnie's finished, we'll hear from Ahsoka. So will I go into the first slide, Bonnie?
Thanks, Darrell. So please show my slide.
Yep.
So here in this slide, the first slide is the Philippine Water Safety Plan Regulatory Auditing Framework. And as I mentioned during day one or day two, the Philippine Water Safety Plan auditing is composed of two phases. The phase one is under Water Safety Plan development, and the phase two is Water Safety Plan implementation. So we have already a policy on auditing the Water Safety Plan development, and that is the review and approval of Water Safety Plan document for new and for renewal of Water Safety Plan. With regards to who will review the Water Safety Plan, so note that we are using the word review and not audit for the WSP document. For the WSP Review Committee, we identified 5 members, and these are the following. One coming from the health department, or could be a health regulator. Second is coming from water regulator. Third is coming from water-related agency. One from the academe, and one as a peer reviewer. It could be another water supply provider. With regards to qualifications, so we already agreed with the government at different levels, because the review committee could be organized at different levels, the national level, regional level, or at the local government level. So the first qualification, but in agreement with the government, it should be either any of these qualifications. Should have a baccalaureate degree related to water supply and sanitation. So this is more on the technical side. In terms of engineering, could be a civil engineer, sanitary engineer, or environmental engineer, or a chemical engineer, or experts in public health and environmental disciplines. And with technical knowledge and at least 3-year experience in managing or operating a water utility. And lastly, with technical knowledge and at least 3-year experience in managing or implementing water and sanitation programs and projects. Because it depends on the complexity of the water utilities. So that's why we are recommending all of these qualifications in the review of Water Safety Plan. On the second phase of Water Safety Plan implementation, there are 2 activities that I also mentioned previously. One is monitoring, which is being done every year. It is being done by an independent also water safety plan monitoring team, but we call that deputized agencies. So deputized agencies by the Department of Health. So these are agencies that are responsible for regulating other types of water utilities. So they are responsible also for monitoring. So they are not involved in water safety plan preparation and water safety plan review. And the second one, I think this is the heart of the auditing, is the external audit. It is also already emphasized that it's every 3 years to be conducted by the Philippines, but we have no guidelines yet on how to do this. So that's why we are now contemplating or come up with guidelines on how to do the external auditing with certified individual auditors and or accredited auditing institutions. So we're thinking if it's a small water supply system, it could be just a certified individual auditor, but it's a big water supply system, then it should be, or it could be through accredited auditing institutions. So these are the setup on phase 2 water safety plan implementation that we are thinking. As I mentioned, policy is still being developed. It's already drafted. It will be subjected to testing in project areas this year and next year. And hopefully before the project ends from the default project, it will become a policy of the national agency of the Department of Health. Next slide, Darrell. There are some issues in this. in implementing this. One is the mechanism for payment scheme. This is being discussed previously. For the review and approval, we just say there that it depends on the level of the review committee, national, regional, or local government units, and the existing system that they are having in terms of application for water safety plan review. So they have already an existing payment system for that. It's a minimal amount, so it depends on the agency that are implementing the review. And also, we are thinking of limited water safety plan experts as auditors. For the review and approval, we could come up with some, but for the phase 2 auditing, that could be some limitations. So I'll discuss that later. And then the schemes for accreditation and certification, we have still to establish that. Maybe getting experience from Australia or other countries that have good experience on accreditation certification. So we have still to come up with that. And the incentive mechanisms. For the water safety plan review, we have already an incentive. If the Department of Health can issue the water safety plan acceptance as a means of approval of water safety plan, then water utility can say at the end of the year, they will be qualified to have performance bonus. So that's an financial incentive to all staff in that water utility to receive performance bonus in terms of cash. However, in the auditing, the phase 2, we are still thinking whether we would like to incorporate that. So some recommendations on these issues are, let's say for the phase 2 auditing, we are thinking if it is a big water supply system that they have to pay because they have income. But for small water systems, we are thinking that it should be subsidized by the government, coming getting money from the big water supply system. So that's what we call big brother approach. Then the capacity building on water safety plan auditing. So we have still to establish this. It may take time if at the country level we'll do that. So maybe we'll be requesting regional office of WHO to support us on this to accelerate the capacity building on auditors, or having an individual or even a team of auditors. Then guidelines for accreditation. Definitely, the auditing will not work without the guidelines from the Department of Health. So whatever learnings that we can get from the DPOT project on accreditation and certification because we'll be testing this in these project areas that will end up with a national policy guideline for auditing. And then lastly, to link the water safety plan auditing to performance bonus. That could be, or provide an award system. The Department of Health is providing an award system in terms of releasing or awarding the certificate of water safety plan acceptance every year during the World Environmental Health Day in the Philippines. So it's a formal award given to all water utilities that have water safety plan. And maybe for the audited also, we can include that to have them an incentive to really do this auditing in the country level. Right, so that's all, Daryl, for our system here in the Philippines that we are thinking about.
Well, that's really good, Bonnie. There's a lot of really good information there. And for countries that are starting this program, I'm sure you'll get inquiries from them down the track to help them. So let's now move ahead and get Asoka, who's going to share some of his experiences from his location. Asoka?
Yeah, over to you, Daryl. Just keep, you can start the slides. So I'm specifically talking about the state of Victoria in Australia. We have 6 different states and seven and a territory. We all have slightly different WSP auditing requirements, right? So I'm going to just give you an example from here. So it's written into our regulations. It must be the WSP must be audited by an approved auditor. Next, thanks. And then the safe drinking water access audit approval criteria. So, the criteria were discussed in some of the sessions. Yeah, so it's very clear. There is a criteria, and keep checking, keep clicking, keep going. So holds an accreditation by an institution, and the institution is defined by the health department, the regulator. Next, thanks. Then also experience and qualification. Now, the qualification are very similar to, I guess, what Bonnie was saying. They must have the person must have a degree, but number of years we've ramped up a little bit in our needs. 7 years relevant experience in the water industry or related activities. Next, thanks. This is something we discuss. I can be a very good technical person, but I could be a terrible auditor if I don't have the skill set to, deal with people. So fit person, and there's some specific testing on that, and also no conflict of interest. So we touch base on that in the Q&A session. I can't go and train a vote utility and then go and audit them. That's conflict of interest. Next, thanks. So our health regulator have this very clearly defined auditor certification scheme, and it's run through an independent body called Exemplar Global. And next, thanks. So it's a competency-based auditor certification scheme. The auditor needs to sit through an exam. Next, down. Thanks. So to make sure the auditor is skilled and appropriately trained, etc. Next, competency. So keep in mind, we've been talking about this over the last few days, the independent and the need for to be independent. They're totally independent, nothing to do with the water utility, right? Especially these, remember, these are external audits. Of course, internal audits can be done by people within the organization. So we go and pick the auditor from our regulator's website. If you go to our website, you can actually see the listed auditors. Not our website, sorry, our regulators, Department of Health website. Next, thanks. Keep clicking, Daryl. And there's very clear guidance from our regulator describing the criteria, starting from how to select the auditor, how to apply. So we use this and we apply. We select an auditor and we send that for approval, including the conflict of interests. How many auditors in an audit team could we have? It could be one, it could be more than one. Typically in Victoria, it's one, because actually it's a bit of an not very expensive, but it's an expensive affair. And these auditors are highly skilled, so you actually don't need 3 auditors in this case. But there are other instances you can have a lead auditor and a supporting auditors. Next, thanks. So at the end of the audit, you get a certificate. So the auditor must issue a certificate to the auditee. So as I don't know, you can't probably read it. This is the audit certificate for Yarra Valley Water for the audit, the certification audit or the regulatory audit we did in in August this year. And it's issued to my name. And this is published in our annual report. If you go to our annual reports, drinking water annual report, this audit report's published. So it's a very clear-cut process. I think that's it, Daryl. Yeah, so I mentioned all about that already.
Okay, thank you very much, Asoka. Now, everybody has a chance to ask these experts that are right with us today. So what I'd like you to do is to open up your chat again and then put some questions on the chat, and we'll have a process of going through that. And we've got, we're not rushed here. We've got comfortable more than 10 minutes to spend on this. So start typing.
And can we suggest, if your question is for Bonnie or for Asoka, please indicate that in the chat, who you would like us to direct your question to.
Can I ask a question while everyone's thinking of that too? This is to either Bonnie or Asoka. In the case of Bonnie, it's what do you think would happen? The question is, how would the performance of the auditors be checked?
I can start while Bonnie is thinking. So the performance check through that certification process, they have to set, they have to pass an exam, but also before becoming an auditor, you have to go and do what they call, they have to perform in front of a certified auditor, like a trial audit. So your performance is no better than, doing it and getting checked by an expert in that field. So that's how we do. And then every 3 years, this is the difficult bit. Every 3 years, the certification need to be renewed, and that costs, unfortunately, money. So yes, you have to be really up to date on everything.
Bonnie, do you want to add anything there?
Yes, I think that's a very good question, actually. And we are thinking on how to put that in our draft guidelines, considering that auditors, like for example, our commission on audit for financial matters, nobody's checking them. But for this WSP auditors, maybe we would like to have, let's say, a feedback mechanism coming from the water utilities themselves, because we don't know what are their behavior during the audit. So maybe we could include that in the guidelines that we are developing. That's a good question. Thanks.
Yep, and that's a very good answer, Bonnie. Thank you. Debbie, have you got anything to ask at this stage?
Yeah, I have some list here. So actually, there's a questions from the Bangladesh for Asoka. Can they have a copy of Safe Drinking Water Act 2003?
You go to Google, type in Safe Drinking Water Act Victoria, Australia. You'll get a link to the government website, and you can download.
Christina, do you have anything to ask?
So we have a question from Sudan in Nepal, and this is to Bonnie. Do you have different guidelines for phase 1 and phase 2 audit, or are you using the WHO guidance for both?
We have already guidelines, operational manual or manual of operations for phase 1 audit. So we can share that to you here in our training. But for phase 2, we are still on the draft stage of finalizing our guidelines. So lessons from our discussions will be inputted there.
And can I ask a follow-up question, Bonnie, on that? Does that mean that your guidelines are sort of based on the WHO guidance and you added them to suit?
Yes, the WSP auditing guidelines is one of our references in doing the phase 1 guidelines. And for phase 2 also, the WHO guidelines is a major reference. Of course, there are some national context that we need to consider in terms of, let's say, approval. The Department of Health is very keen to approve all documents to be released to any water utility to show that their authority in terms of drinking water quality.
Okay, good. Thank you. Debbie, you got any more questions?
Yes, I have question from myself. For Bonnie and Asoka, do the auditors need to take risk certifications?
Yes.
For the okay.
No, the simple answer, yes. Every 3 years.
Every 3 years. Okay, thank you. How about Bonnie?
We are still thinking about that. For phase 1, there is no certification requirement, but certification is planned to be conducted for phase 2 auditors.
Sure, thank you.
Christina.
We have one question from Louis in Timor-Leste. This is to both Bonnie and Ashoka again. Who should issue the certification for certified auditors? Can it be done by the government or an independent audit company?
I'll have a crack at it. If you ask, you go ahead first, Bonnie.
Yeah, for the Philippines, it's the Department of Health who has the mandate to issue that. So accreditation or certification, it's within the Department of Health, the Philippines.
Yeah, so same here. The Department of Health certify the auditors based on the third party, that exemplar global auditor assessment criteria. So auditor has to pass the test and pass the trial audit, then the department will issue the certificate. But it doesn't have to be that department. It can be another regulator can I guess delegate that authority to another government department. It doesn't have to be a specific health department. It can be other government or agencies, but they should be independent of the process.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Basanta from Sri Lanka. That I would like to forward this question to Sasoka as Mr. Benny. So that the thing is that we are having a problem how to select auditors for external audits, and in the now our practice is that we are getting two auditors like lead auditor as well as a technical auditor. Technical auditor is not a issue at this moment. The lead auditor that having some more other areas like that. So that is it possible to incorporate what's called ISO auditors into this lead auditing part?
All right, so anything is possible, Vasanta, but ISO auditors, they have a skill set of auditing against ISO standards, and if they don't know, they're not skilled about water safety plans. My question is, how can they audit water safety plans without. So you need to have a process to somehow have a pool of auditors, either within the ISO auditors or outside, who can work within ISO system or as a hybrid system, where you have the auditors, especially the technical auditors you mentioned, as part of the audit team to have the right skill set. And currently, I know you don't have that process, so you need to develop some sort of criteria. It may not be through, it might be through your ISO system as well.
Thank you very much.
I just have
Okay.
one comment on the Philippines framework of auditing. I understand that, in order to build up auditing program or system in the country, it's good to have a phase 1 and phase 2. However, once we have a developed already auditing system, the system should not consist of like the phase 1, because phase 1, the nature is kind of like consulting to provide consulting services to water suppliers to develop WSP, but it's not the function of the auditors. So I think I would like Bonnie to explain about that.
Thanks, Nia, for that question. Actually, yeah, water utilities may hire consultants to help them in developing their water safety plan, but the review is within the government. The review of water safety plan is headed by the Department of Health or any health department at the lower level. And the members are also water regulator. And there are some water supply providers there who are peer reviewers and the academe as part of the review committee. So I could not see any conflict of interest in that. And yeah, but the consultants can be part of that, but it's more on the water utility side, and they can be part of internal auditing. But the external auditing is basically the responsibility of the government, and there's no involved consultants in the process. Over to you. Is that okay? Is that my answer complete?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so I have 3 questions here. I think I'll take them together if Bonnie and Ashoka can attempt them all. So in countries where audits are paid for, who pays for the audits? The supplier, the regulatory authority, or others? That's question 1. Question 2 is there a different audit program for rural and urban water systems? Question 3 is there a criteria, a qualification, or certification required for the ones providing certification? Example, the MOH.
Yeah, the water supplier pays for it. As simple as that. The second question is, what was the second question? I'm trying to remember.
Between urban and rural.
No
Yeah,
difference
maybe I'll
between.
answer the urban and rural. Maybe I can answer.
Very good, Bonnie.
Go ahead.
We have no difference. So the same procedure for reviewing water safety plan for urban or rural area. For the phase 2, we are still thinking about that on whether there will be a big difference, because urban areas might have big water supply systems and rural areas might have small water system. So that's the difference, and we will be establishing a guideline.
And third question, remind me, Christina.
Who certifies the certifiers?
So this is a reputed global body, Exemplar Global. They are. It's like they have to meet certain requirements as a certifying body. There are international standards again, though, so they have to meet those standards. Basically, yeah, they don't need to be certified. They have this right skill set. They're like who are checking who's writing those ISO standards. There's no one. ISO standards written by a group of experts, right? But we don't go and audit the ISO experts to see whether the ISO standard is right. So that they have to stop somewhere.
Bonnie?
Yeah, for the Philippines, we would like to establish a certification system yet. And we are thinking of, an international body can help us to set up the system. I'm looking on, is it possible to come up with this ISO standard? That could be one idea. Or maybe WHO can come up with their own certification system. Because on my understanding, WHO is the one who initiated this water safety plan activity, and WHO has the expertise to do that. So we are still thinking about it, and maybe WHO regional office or headquarters can help us to establish a system in my country.
Well, thank you very much to our 2 visiting facilitators. You might want to add a little clap there if you see it in your controls. And there's obviously a lot of interest in that, and that's been really good discussion. It sounds like you had good discussion in your groups. So that's it for today. Tomorrow we might have another question and answer time. So be sure to get your questions in. But today, if you've got any questions, please write them in chat and I'll close the meeting. And we will see you tomorrow for the last and final day. Thank you very much.